Yes, hello, I hope you can hear me. Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes.
great. Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm a PhD student at the University of Heidelberg in Germany, and I'm focusing on the genocide of Sinti and Romani people. And today I would like to give an insight into one class I taught in my last winter term. I hope to see a lot of you at the conference in Belgrade in October, because then I will present my topic from a researcher's perspective. But since this is about education, I wanted to give some insights about how I taught this topic in a German university context. So in the winter term 2023, I taught the class Female Perpetrators, Bystanders, and Resistance Fighters, the Holocaust and Genocide of Sinti and Roma from a gender historically differentiated perspective.
Verena, excuse me for interrupting you, because I see that you're trying to share the screen and
it's not working. Okay, and then it's...
Because if you want to show something, there is nothing there.
Okay, because I'm looking at it, but obviously you're not. Let's try again. How about now? Better,
now
right?
we can see.
Okay. Yeah, so I use this wide approach, like wide societal approach. And most of you are familiar with Raoul Hilberg's work, Perpetrators, Victims, and Bystanders. And I wanted to look at not just the perspective of the persecuted and the gender aspects, but also like the German societal context of the non-persecuted who were bystanding and perpetrating. So the class was for undergraduate and graduate students, and 1/3 of them were teaching students. So they wanted to become teachers themselves for like a high school level. And their motivation was mainly because they experienced it as new topics, especially the gender approach and the history of the persecution of Sinti and Roma under the Nazi regime. And in general, they wanted to gain a more complex understanding of history. They felt that often it's too oversimplified, and often like black and white distinctions are made. They wanted to have fruitful discussions. They also wanted, it was part of a methodology seminar for undergraduate and graduate students. So they wanted to gain this new perspective of gender history. And some of them said they wanted to get a better understanding of today's situation. And that was actually a big, in the initial talks, a lot of them referred to today's situation. So in Germany, and I think in a lot of other countries, we also have these debates since there is most languages are gender sensitive. So we have male, female version, and then it's the question of how to deal with the ones that are neither male or female, and how to be aware of discrimination through language. So in German, we often use the generic masculine, so we just use the masculine form, even if it's also includes women. And for example, with the topic perpetrators, it's often used in the masculine form, although women also in the Nazi period committed crimes as perpetrators, not just as helpers. And also with the topic of Sinti and Roma, often the negative term gypsies is used, which is a construct, a discursive construct, and does carries a lot of negative stereotypes, and that often don't fit the reality of the people, but it's always projected onto the people by stigmatizing them as so-called gypsies. In the class, because my problem was that research on the genocide of Sinti and Roma is not as advanced as the Shoah, the research on the Shoah. So I combined both, and first did some introductory remarks, and then I looked at these different specific fields of perpetration, bystanding, and resisting. And then we had practical exercise. We went to, in Heidelberg, this Documentation and Culture Center of German Sinti and Roma. Here's an example of the exhibition. And the students looked at the exhibition and analyzed it according to these three topics: the representation of perpetrators and gender, the representation of resistance, and the representation of bystanders in the use of oral history. And towards the end, we had some lectures by experts on the judicial prosecution of female perpetrators on the case of Stella Goldschlag, who was Jewish, persecuted herself, but was forced by the Gestapo in Berlin to report Jews who were hiding, and then female Jewish partisans in France. And I always used a very open approach. So, for example, when we discussed resistance, I gave the students biographies that they analyzed and dealt with. And then they came up with the definition of resistance themselves. And then we compared it to the existing research definitions, and then they applied it to the museum. Generally speaking, their interest in the topic increased. That's what the evaluation showed. And they said their learning gain was quite high. They would have loved more discussions. They, in the open remarks, they said they really liked the practical approach with the museum or with the exhibition. One side remark, the female differential, it's an exhibition from 1997, and there are female or women represented, but it's not on a very sensitive and analytical level. There's one panel that says the women, and then it's basically about female Sinti and Roma in Ravensbrück. And they liked the different teaching methods, and they would have liked more discussions. My evaluation of this, and that's probably most interesting for you now as dealing with education as well, students sometimes had a problem with grasping the difference between women's history and gender approaches, where gender is seen as a discursive construct, and that was a bit, even though there were graduate students, sometimes that was a bit too complex for them. So they thought if women are included, it's already enough. So if we have a like women narrative, but it's not the discursive construct of gender. And by the way, I also dealt with Nama Schick's interview with Hedi Solzbach to analyze exactly this topic, how gender is asked for, like gender perspectives in the interview, and how it's constructed in narratives in our history, but still was quite complex for students. The focus on different forms of behavior was like they needed to think outside their categories of like black and white distinctions, and they realized its behavior was more fluid and complex. Dealing with different definitions and coming up with their own definitions was a challenge. They always asked for my feedback, whether what they said was correct or not. They questioned, and that's what I found most important, because Andrea Petro also just referred to the illiberal situation. A lot of students later on questioned themselves how they would have acted in that situation. And according to some, I'll finish in a minute, according to some didactic approaches, we deal with the history, we do a factual analysis of historical records and analyze what happened. We try to answer why it happened like that and do a judgment on like the situation in the past. But then we also do a value judgment and ask, what does it mean for us today? And that gives students some orientation and guidance for like today's situation. And yeah, I particularly like that students came up with the question how they would have reacted, because it shows that they understood it's not just it depended on the behavior of people. And nowadays there's a lot of research on commemoration in Germany, and actually statistics show that 60% of German society, which is more diverse and pluralistic than during the Second World War due to migration, but 60% of Germans believe that their relatives back then were either amongst the resistance fighters or persecuted. So they don't see their family members as being part of the crimes that were committed. And yeah, so maybe I'll stop on this note. I have a few more remarks on our history from this year's seminar, but we can also leave it for discussions and tomorrow.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I just